Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and today we're hearing that crazy beat and trying to solve some riddles while I give my full in-depth review of Riddler's Revenge at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. This coaster, built by B&M in 1997 and opening in 1998, is still the world's tallest, fastest, and longest stand-up coaster. Now, if that wasn't enough when it first opened, it was officially the coaster with the tallest vertical loop in the world as well, until that record was taken by Superman Krypton coaster at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas in 2000. Funnily enough, though, that record would come back to Six Flags Magic Mountain in 2013 with Full Throttle, which there will be a review quite soon for on this channel, so make sure to subscribe. But the Riddler's Revenge was the second B&M or Bollinger and Mabillard coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain, right after Batman the Ride, the famous inverted coaster. And of course, all of the theming near the back of the park ties into that DC universe and comics theme. But before we figure out the riddle that is trying to get to this coaster, here's just a quick list of stats. I did mention it is still the tallest, fastest, and longest stand-up coaster in the world today, and currently it stands at 156 feet tall. It cruises at a top speed of 65 miles an hour and glides over a track length of 4,370 feet. It also features 6 different inversions. And just as a quick fun fact, when it was built at the park, it was one of the park's biggest investments ever at an estimated cost of $14 million, which in today's money would cost around $23 million. So with all that said, let's figure out how to get to the Riddler's Revenge. Now, of course, if you're a seasoned veteran of Six Flags Magic Mountain, you'll know once you enter into the main entrance gate and take a right, there will be 2 paths that you will come across. Now, this isn't like the paths, of course, in the Robert Frost poem. Sure, one's a little steeper and goes uphill, but in terms of distance and real troubles to get to Riddler's Revenge, they're almost exactly the same. If you take a left, make sure to keep walking as far as you can past X2, past Viper, Tatsu, and go all the way through the underground and past Jetstream, and that's when you'll come across the Metropolis area of the park, which of course is where the Riddler's Revenge is located. Now, if you take the right-hand side, you'll pass by Full Throttle, the Full Throttle Sports Bar, Bugs Bunny World, go by Goliath and underneath Superman before swinging a left past DC Universe, and after seeing Crazanity on your left-hand side, you'll see Metropolis right ahead. But of course, Riddler's Revenge is not the only ride in this area. Right next door is Justice League Battle for Metropolis if you want to take on the Joker face-to-face, as well as Harley Quinn, Lex Luthor, and plenty of other villains, while trying to save the Justice League. Across the way, though, is the classic Scrambler, and Jammin' Bumpers the Bumper Cars is right next door to that as well. But with that said, even though you see Riddler's Revenge now, you definitely would have been able to hear it quite a long time ago. So with that, we'll see the giant question mark above the queue entrance and find out what riddles are in store in the line. Immediately as you walk underneath this giant question mark of an entrance sign, you'll find yourself enveloped in this crazy giant piece of metal, as well as plenty of trees and shade. Now, in all honesty, this queue, at least in this portion, is just a nice walk that kind of snakes and slithers underneath the coaster. Eventually, you'll find yourself at a set of switchbacks right next to one of the biggest inversions on the ride, the inclined loop. And before you know it, you'll be heading up a stairway indoors, and this is when the riddles envelop you. What's dark, mysterious, and has a crazy late 90s techno beat? Well, that's of course the station. You'll find yourself looking at tons of neon question marks all over the walls and ceilings. And of course, once you make it all the way up the staircase and enter into the station itself, you'll be greeted with a different line for each row. Now, do be warned, the way this station is set up, the longest line will be for the front row, and the shortest will be for the back, at least in terms of physical length. Now, if you want to wait the least amount of time, I do recommend going somewhere in the middle, but if you want a more intense ride, go to the back, and of course, if you want to feel that wind in your face, go to the front. But as you're waiting, you will have a catchy song stuck in your head for probably the rest of the day, as you see projected question marks fly all over the place. And while you're bobbing your head, before you know it, you'll be hopping on this crazy stand-up coaster. Looking towards these seats, I know a lot of people are going to be worried, especially guys. And the reason is that this coaster features a bicycle seat in which you physically are standing or sometimes squatting throughout the duration of this ride. Now, in addition to this bicycle seat underneath, you will have an over-the-shoulder restraint go over the sides of your head and secure you all the way down to your belly. And I gotta say, it's incredibly comparable to other B&Ms in the park, just like Scream and Batman the Ride. But it's really that bottom half of the seat that gets a lot of people scared. And for a lot of people, this can make or break the experience. But as you take your seat or your straddling position, you will be met with the seat bouncing up and down. Now, my rule of thumb is to push the seat down just enough where I can bend my knees at about a 15-degree angle. So I have a little bit of relief, and that bicycle seat isn't going where it shouldn't, but I'm also not overworking my legs in a squatting position. So if you can get to that spot, I think you'll have a better experience than you might think, or a better experience than you may have had in the past, but at least that's my rule of thumb. Personally, I've never really had a problem with this ride because I get into that position, but I will say the one ride where I didn't get all the way that far and was a little higher up, it was a little bit painful. But with that said, while the music is still blaring, let's take a ride on arguably one of the loudest coasters I have ever experienced. Immediately out of the station, as you start to slowly roll out, you'll take a slight right turn into the lift hill. Now, this lift hill is quite high, especially since it gets to 156 feet in the air. So if you're expecting a shorter ride, you're not going to be getting it on Riddler's Revenge. But I will say, this lift hill gives a great view of the park, especially down in the Metropolis section, over toward Batman and DC Universe, and of course, toward Superman as well. But one cool thing, as you're going about halfway up this lift hill, you'll be greeted with the biggest vertical loop, the first inversion on this coaster, right above your head, which I think is always a cool thing to see, and is really rare on most coasters, especially nowadays. But before you know it, you'll be taking that little dip down before strafing all the way to the left and diving down toward the ground. This drop, especially in the back row, whips you to the side real quick, so be prepared for that. And I will say, you pick up speed a heck of a lot quicker than you could ever think possible. And honestly, it feels a lot steeper than it really is. But before you know it, you'll be hitting some crazy positive G's as you go directly feet up into that giant vertical loop over the lift hill, which, if you're looking up, you can see the lift hill underneath you, and it's quite a trippy experience. Now, immediately after this, you'll experience a little bit of shuffling back and forth, so be prepared. Hold on to that over-the-shoulder restraint, or try and keep your head forward a little bit so you don't bash your head side to side. And you'll go slightly to the left into the first of two giant dive loops. This element takes you up to the top and then flips you upside down, making a C shape before you go back toward the ground. Now, all of the inversions thus far are pretty intense overall, especially that first vertical loop, so do be prepared for that. Now, immediately after that first dive loop, you'll find yourself going to the right this time and going into the second of these pretty massive inversions. Soon after this, though, you'll have a section of straight track followed by an inclined loop. And what that is realistically, if you take a vertical loop and slant it to a 45-degree angle, an inclined loop is what you're gonna get. Now, this inversion doesn't necessarily feel like an inversion. It's almost more of an overbanked helix, but I will say it is a quite rare element to see, especially nowadays. So it gives you a different experience than pretty much any other inversion in the park. Now comes one of my favorite moments of the ride, and I know a lot of people's probably least favorite, but immediately after this incline loop, you swing to the right, banking underneath a tree before twisting upwards super quickly into the mid-course brake run. I love just the gracefulness of these two moments, and of course that awesome head chopper. And immediately after this turnaround, you snap into that mid-course brake run for a quick breather. Now, I will say prepare for that snap, because it can be a little brutal, especially if you're not prepared for it. But immediately after this, you'll dive down a kind of shallow drop into the first of two flat spin inversions. Now, these inversions are kind of like corkscrews, and for all intents and purposes, they really are just corkscrews, but what B&M call corkscrews, where you twist upside down while also going to the side. And of course, this original element gets its name from that little piece of machinery used on wine corks. Immediately after this whippy element, that if you're near the back of the train will just fling you around, you'll pass by these cool facades that they added in to help with the theme near the front entrance. And I gotta say, visually, it is one of the coolest moments of the ride. Following this, you'll go upward just a bit to this kind of modest airtime hill, which, if it's running quick, you might get a little bit of that weightless feeling, but not too much, honestly. It is kind of another nice breather, though, in between all of the crazy inversions. But immediately after this, you'll turn to the right in an upward helix before meandering toward the left and diving down right next to the station and queue before entering into the second flat spin element immediately over the people waiting in line, which I think is always a cool moment for those in line as well as on the ride. But I will say, for those in line, be prepared to cover your ears because this ride gets ridiculously loud. And then slowly you will head into that brake run, turning upwards and right. And there you have it. The Riddler's revenge has been taken out on you. But make sure to grab your belongings on the left-hand side and head down that exit stairway before meandering again throughout the track within the exit queue. I will say, though, be prepared for this coaster to be really loud if it's going overhead, especially in the exit, because it does get ridiculously close when you're walking by. But you'll exit out toward the side in comparison to the entrance. And while your physical experience with this coaster is over, I will promise you that your ears will be experiencing Riddler's Revenge from quite a ways away. To sum up all of my thoughts on this crazy stand-up coaster, though, I will say, even though this ride is themed to Jim Carrey's portrayal of the Riddler, and of course Batman Forever, while the exterior and the theming give off kind of that cartoonish vibe, this coaster is anything but. It is heart-pounding and intense, and after those first couple elements, it says, we're not taking any survivors. But personally, I gotta say, the more and more I ride this coaster, the more and more I've begun to love it. My first couple experiences, I was kinda iffy on it, but especially as of the last year, it has grown to be one of my favorite coasters in the park, if not all of Southern California, especially for its uniqueness in seating style, layout, and of course inversions, and add in that intensity and usual low wait time. It is a great ride to go on midway through your day and pick up that intensity once again. Now, in terms of my favorite and least favorite moments, I gotta say my favorite moments have to be either the first drop, that first vertical loop, going into the brake run itself, or those dive loops even. In terms of least favorite though, I can't really think of a part of the ride that I genuinely dislike. I think this layout is probably one of the best that I have experienced personally, with its meandering sections that are super graceful in between those crazy intense inversions. And I must say, if you've never been to the park before, this is definitely a must hit. Sure, it's not necessarily on the same level as something like Twisted Colossus, Tatsu, X2, or maybe even Full Throttle or West Coast Racers, but it is definitely something that you have to experience just for the fact that you can't ride anything like it within a 2,000-mile radius. But with that said, let's move on to my ratings. Now, if you didn't know, I do have more of an unorthodox rating system. I technically have 4 of them as well, with the first being a ski slope rating, pretty much judging how experienced of a roller coaster rider you should be before taking on this crazy ride, an intensity rating, a fun rating, and of course an overall score out of 10. But starting with that ski slope rating, I gotta give this a black diamond. It is definitely for experienced coaster riders and should not be the first ride you go on in the park, especially if you've not been on many roller coasters before. Don't get me wrong, this is not the most intense coaster in this park, but it is definitely on the upper tier with the 6 different inversions, high speeds, and different seating style. I will say it is not for the faint of heart, and I would definitely recommend riding rides like West Coast Racers, New Revolution, or Gold Rusher at least before taking this on. Now, speaking of that intensity, I will give it a 4-star rating out of 5. And moving over toward fun, I gotta say it's a 3-star rating for me. Sure, it's not exactly the most fun experience, but it's more about that intensity with this ride and striking your heartstrings with a note of fear. Now, that moves us to my overall rating out of 10, and personally, I gotta give this thing an 8 out of 10. Sure, it's not perfect, but it is definitely in my top echelon of roller coasters that I've been on out of the over 110. And while sure, it's not been in my top 25 as of the past couple of years, it is definitely very close to it, being in my honorable mentions for 2 years running. But now I gotta ask the simple riddle of what do you think of the Riddler's Revenge? I'm very curious to know. Let me know down in the comments below. And let me know what coaster or ride you're most excited for me to review at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I have new playlists for all of the parks that I have reviews from, so make sure to go check out those playlists if you want to see things from specific parks that I have been to. And at Magic Mountain specifically, I do have a Tatsu and West Coast Racers review already out. But before I leave, I gotta leave you with one more riddle, and that's what's bright, techno, and has a dash of villainy? Well, the Riddler's Revenge, of course. But thank you all so much for watching, and of course, until next time, we'll see you on the next ride.